Welcome to the 39th episode of A Change Its Chance. My name is Ryan Lowe, and my goal is to educate listeners, especially the youth, on the most polarizing issues in this world by interviewing different experts who can lead us into the charge for change. Today, we're talking about an issue that I have long wanted to discuss on this podcast. We've gone over climate change and racism, classism, climate injustices, mental health, and global education, but we've yet to address a glaring issue that has been a hotly contested topic in the upcoming presidential election. Yes, I'm talking about reproductive rights. Many people might say that reproductive rights solely encompass abortion, but that view very much misses the point. A woman's right to choose what they want for their own body. One side in particular rejects this principle, the basic principle that a woman's right to choose is a basic right, for various reasons, and this foundational disagreement has become even more heated since Roe v. Wade was overturned almost 1.5 years ago, and the debate of a woman's right has risen to the top of issues in the upcoming election. But the bottom line is, if we as a nation cannot even allow women to make their own decisions, how are we going to defeat institutional injustices and the global climate crisis? To elaborate on this matter, we have Ms. Tara Murtha from the Women's Law Project, a Pennsylvania nonprofit public interest legal organization working to defend and advance the rights of women, girls, and LGBTQ plus people in Pennsylvania and beyond. Ms. Murtha is the Director of Impact and Engagement there, and she focuses on political analysis, communication, and the media. Additionally, she's written many articles on various topics, but her background in elevating the voices of women is undeniable. So, Ms. Murtha, it's really great to see you today. I have really long waited for the right person to have a meaningful discussion with on this topic. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate your interest in the topic for sure.
Yeah, this already is really important for the current times. So let's start very generally.
Okay.
Why exactly is reproductive autonomy so crucial in this election? And what are some of the potential impacts on reproductive autonomy that this election may have?
Okay, so just to sort of lay the foundation here, Women's Law Project is a C3, a nonprofit C3. So I don't talk, we don't get engaged in electoral politics, but I'm certainly happy to give you the broad sort of background about reproductive autonomy and abortion. And in general, elections have consequences, and certainly various, the legal landscape that we're looking at now and what we could be looking at. Reproductive autonomy isn't just crucial in this election or elections broadly, it's crucial in life. And unfortunately, our lives are increasingly informed by the consequences of elections. But look, there's the elephant in the room with this election is Project 2025, which, to be clear, is a Heritage Foundation work product, though it is intended to be enacted by the next president willing to enact it. So I'll leave that to voters to decide about that. But certainly if you've taken a look, even just, it's hundreds of pages, but if you've reviewed it at all, and there's been so much news coverage of it because it is so unprecedented, and it's this blueprint and playbook right out in the public where we could see certainly at least the intentions of its authors and people who subscribe to these beliefs. So, when you take a look at Project 2025, it's all about eliminating lots of freedoms, but certainly to focus on reproductive freedom, there's many mechanisms outlined in Project 2025, which would seek to eliminate access to to abortion and reproductive autonomy. And to set to also just address what you said in the intro, it's so right that abortion is the sort of boogeyman tip of the spear of reproductive autonomy. What we're seeing is that, of course, you can't isolate abortion in healthcare, and it can't be isolated legally, or else the next obvious question, if you could, well, then why aren't those abortion bans that could just isolate abortion the ones being enacted? Why are we seeing pregnant people refuse emergency medical care at emergency rooms? Why are we seeing this cascade of other events? Attacks on IVF, unwanted forced cesarean sections. This is obstetric violence. So So just to be clear, when we might say abortion as the shorthand, but abortion cannot be separated from the spectrum of reproductive autonomy. And that's what we're talking about. That's what's at issue here. And the mechanisms that have been offered and talked about and discussed as strategies that the anti-abortion agenda anti-abortion activists and strategists want to advance in their agenda begin with eliminating access to mifepristone. There's couple different mechanisms offered for that, revoking FDA approval, which we saw that attempt via a case that was before the US Supreme Court this year. Reinstating unnecessary restrictions on access to mifepristone, trying to resurrect zombie laws like the Comstock Act. Medication abortion in particular is a huge target and goal to rescind and eliminate from the anti-abortion movement because it's the most popular form of abortion in the United States today. At least 63% at last time I checked of abortions are medication abortions. And also because medication abortions give patients more privacy, which deprives anti-abortion activists of opportunities to delay, deter, deceive people out of finding abortion care through traditional anti-abortion means, screaming outside of clinics, getting people to go into anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers instead of legitimate providers, all of those sort of tactics.
Yeah.
And so that's very frightening because we saw we're seeing, states are the labs of democracy, right? And we were seeing in Louisiana where both mifepristone and misoprostol, those are the two medications used in a medication abortion, were classified as a controlled substance. And the practical effect is that that medicine is removed from crash carts. And to be clear, abortion is already banned in Louisiana. And Louisiana physicians have clearly stated this is a backdoor maneuver that will likely result in preventable deaths. And, aside from abortion, these drugs are used routinely to treat miscarriages, induce labor, prepare pregnant patients for surgical procedures, stop postpartum hemorrhaging, and it also has applications beyond pregnancy. So these are life-threatening conditions that require immediate medical attention. And this is a strategy that does nothing but delay that treatment. I don't know if you heard this, but doctors in Louisiana are practicing drills. They're literally practicing running from patient rooms to the cart where the medication is now locked up under law. That's horrific. That's where we're at in this country, where physicians are training in sprinting in order to shave a few seconds off of their time to be able to have the right, to have the ability to treat a pregnant person in medical crisis.
Yeah. And it is really not okay that we've come this far. And clearly it's made reproductive autonomy such a great issue in this country. So do you believe that this will have a major impact on the election?
Oh, I mean, data shows, polling is showing that abortion is a hugely important topic to people in this election. Polling has always shown that the majority of people in the United States support abortion access and abortion rights. That's always been the case. It's been a bit of trick of anti-abortion marketing propaganda to sell abortion access as controversial. Abortion is not controversial. You know, when you're depriving the people of something that they want in defiance of medical expertise, which says it will harm public health, the word for that is not controversy, that's tyranny, right? So what's happening, I think, that we've seen since Dobbs is that more people, it felt to people not in the movement, it really felt really sort of philosophical, that it wasn't an existential threat. And now, of course, it's an existential threat that the anti-abortion agenda will touch your family or someone that you love or someone that you know. And also every day we're seeing headlines showing, a broad range of abortion ban injuries. And now after just this month, ProPublica reported the first 2 official abortion ban deaths. We're going to see, of course, those numbers will go up, because state level maternal mortality and morbidity committees, which review cause of death, they lag a year or 2 behind, real time. So Dobbs was just over 2 years ago. And so now we have the first 2 official deaths out of Georgia, both of because it was the state maternal mortality committee reviewing those incidents. They ruled that those deaths could have been prevented, that they were caused by the abortion bans. And just today, the Georgia Supreme Court reinstated the ban that that led to those deaths. So that's the situation that we're in. It had been lifted for a very temporary period of time, and now it's reinstalled. So certainly, I mean, every survey and bit of polling shows, depending on demographics and people, not every single person, of course, but that it is a top issue for many people going into hopefully every election, not just every 4 years, people, every election.
Clearly, this situation has become really distraught. Let's talk a lot more about this origin. Where does this fight for reproductive freedom come from, and how have recent times inflated it into a national hot issue? And I know you've talked about this a little bit, but let's elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, the fight for reproductive freedom comes from the effort to deprive us of it. And
Yeah.
we're seeing how, those efforts are increasingly hostile, increasingly aggressive. I mean, they've always been hostile and aggressive, but they historically have been sugar-coated, I'll say, marketed. Well, I'll go back further than that, but that marketing really began in the 90s. But to be clear, to be clear about it, reproductive autonomy is a tradition, is an American tradition. Reproductive autonomy was embraced as a tradition in early history of the United States. And then subsequently was strategically chosen as a political issue leveraged to serve various agendas over the years. The earliest US laws regarding abortion around the 1820s were to protect women from being poisoned by unscrupulous people. They were poison control laws. Later on, the first major wave of criminalizing abortion was explicitly racist. It was a combination of a professional power grab by white male doctors who were competing for business pretty much with midwives. Midwives provided abortion care. And combined with a racist concern, specifically that white Protestant married women were going to these midwives for abortion care. So around the late 1850s, the then American Medical Association launched a campaign to criminalize abortion unless provided by a certified physician under circumstances that they deemed appropriate. Well, who gets to be a credentialed physician in 1857, right? So that motivation was clearly professional power and a response to gender, racial, and class anxiety, as well as explicit anti-immigrant sentiments. The anti-abortion activist who led that campaign, published a letter asking, shall the United States be filled by our own children or by those of aliens? This is the question our women must answer. Upon their loins depends the future destiny of the nation. And to this day, there's cross-pollination between white supremacist groups and the anti-abortion movement, which still exploits gender, race, and class anxieties to advance their agenda. But really then getting into more modern history, it was clearly a public health crisis in the 50s and 60s. Hospital wards were full of women suffering various injuries. By 1965, illegal abortion counted for like 17 or 18% of all maternal mortality. And again, with Black women dying 4 times the rate of white women. I can't help but think that public health crisis, in tandem with the new popularity of television and TV news, perhaps people seeing this happen, galvanized some of the movement. And of course, Roe v. Wade was in 1973. And then there was the next real big pivot in the anti-abortion strategy, really, was in the 1990s. And that's when the anti-abortion movement pivoted from really demonizing women and people who have abortions. And to be clear, I know that's my email. I know that all people of all genders get pregnant and people of all genders need abortion care. So I'm just, establishing that. But the anti-abortion movement doesn't acknowledge that. And they pivoted to protect women language. This was a very strategic marketing decision. that was designed to bring along people who they identified as the muddy middle, literally identified that a concern for the welfare of women, of their friends, wives, mothers, sisters, daughters, held people back from being full bore anti-abortion. And so the strategy was, well, if we tell them, if we sell abortion as dangerous and as harmful, even though all data indicates and shows how safe abortion is, then we could convince people that being anti-abortion is actually protecting women. So it was just a pivot in the marketing. Abortion bans quite obviously don't protect women or anybody who could become pregnant, as we're seeing in the abortion ban injuries every day. Maternal mortality is higher in abortion ban states, and infant mortality is higher in abortion ban states as well.
Yeah, and it's really interesting hearing you talk about this history because, okay, maybe it's just me, but I feel like a lot of people do not know this long history and storyline behind this whole movement. And it'd be really great for people to be educated on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's really seminal books. One that I would recommend is When Abortion Was a Crime by Leslie Reagan. But this is all, well documented. I recommend that anybody interested, because it's really fascinating history. It's the history of the fight for power, right? From the beginning of a nation. And it really does, it's way more than gender is involved, as we've been talking about. Anybody interested in the racial, class, and gender dynamics of American history has to be also interested in this specific history for sure.
Yeah, definitely. You talked a lot about this whole resistance to abortion care and reproductive autonomy. Why do you believe that there is so much resistance to this woman's right to make decisions about their own body?
Control. I mean, one word, control. It's certainly not about, babies, as again, more babies are dying under abortion bans, and the anti-abortion seeking to deny emergency care. It's certainly not about protecting women, where they're seeking to deny emergency care to pregnant people, even with unviable pregnancies. So I also think we have to really think about this in tandem with the unprecedented rise of attacks on gender expansive people and transgender people. We're amid a record number of state bills targeting transgender people, transgender kids. Uh, you know, as an aside, it's incredibly weird to me that there's people who stay up at night worrying about whether a stranger is going to get up the next day and what that person's going to wear or how they're going to wear their hair,
Yeah.
and if their decisions of personal expression reflect what that person staying up worrying about this thinks about what somebody should wear based on their genitalia. I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day. Very, very weird, especially to want to leverage the power of the state to legislate that, or where people can pee. I mean, all of that. But it's not a coincidence that this rise in this anti-trans rhetoric and anti-trans bills and attacks are in tandem with the height of the anti-abortion movements. They are both about maintaining a strict power hierarchy.
Do you think that the majority of the population is aware or acknowledges that this fight comes down to control?
No, I don't. And that's what can make these conversations so difficult. When you look at the history and you work in and look at the motivation behind, legislation, and sort of on the strategy level, and on the, within the historical context, and looking on the strategy level, and, even reading anti-abortion, their own works about, like I said, their own documented history about their marketing pivots and things like that. It's all very clear, but we've been targeted, the general public's been targeted with anti-abortion propaganda campaign and disinformation for a very long time, So do I think that, I think that there's a spectrum of buy-in, and certainly the people at the top understand and are motivated and galvanized by political control and power. I don't think that, sort of your every standard person who just identifies as anti-abortion or an anti-abortion activist follows that chain all the way up. has a different motivation. So that's what can make kitchen table conversations difficult, right?
Yeah.
And it's really important to kind of distinguish. I talk about this all the time. Like, there's kitchen table conversations are important. We should be having them, right? But in the political lens, meaning the policy world, the legal world, the question is, do you think that a individual and families should be able to control the decisions about their bodies and families, or do you think that decision should be forked over to a politician, to Mike Pence or Mike Johnson or anyone named Mike in government, right? So that's that's the clear and crisp question when it comes to the law and when it comes to policy. Within that, of course, it's an emotional topic. Everybody should be having, kitchen table conversations about it, but kitchen table conversations should not be making policy.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about these difficult conversations. For me, as a male and a minor, although I've always known how important these rights are to defend, it has been tougher to relate to the words in reproductive freedom speeches verbatim. And this disconnect is part of the problem, I think. I then think about what my mom went through in conceiving my little brother and her right to the healthcare she needed and her right to use IVF to grow our family. These really are quintessential rights. So, what can men do to better aid women in this critical fight?
Well, first realize that it's not distinct. I mean, and the anti-abortion agenda, we talked a bit about at the top, is authoritarian. Who wants to live you have to decide what type of government you want to live in. You want to live in an authoritarian government, but hope it doesn't reach you. Well, bad news, but an authoritarian government's going to reach pretty much everybody, right? But get in the game and educate yourself. I can appreciate that language can be alienating, or it can feel antagonistic perhaps. And that's unfortunate because we really do want people of any and all genders in the fight and in the movement because this affects people of all genders, right? And again, recognizing that abortion is the sort of the tip of the spear of reproductive autonomy that we're talking about this whole scope, speaking to your family's experience with IVF, and logically just responding to what I see, hate mail I've gotten, things I see on the internet, people to hear people talking in person. Logically, I'll never understand the rhetoric that a person who can tell you, has a belief that the government's inept and small government because the government's inept and they can't do anything right and all that. But then you're going to go ahead and hand your wife or daughter over to the government that you simultaneously believe can't handle anything correctly. And I also don't understand that it's how incredibly there's a lot of very macho anti-abortion talk, right? There's a machismo often that accompanies anti-abortion rhetoric. And yet I can't think of anything weaker than obediently sharing your daughter's menstrual data or letting your wife's medical crisis be decided again by other people, by a government, by anybody else. So there's an incoherency that I can't quite wrap my brain around. But I mean, anti-abortion means surveillance. How can you to criminalize abortion? You have to surveil pregnancy. To surveil pregnancy, you have to surveil the possibility of pregnancy. And that's how the logical chain goes. That's why anti-abortion activists want our medical data, right? There's all kinds of mechanisms to increase surveillance about our reproductive lives and medical choices broadly. There's evidence of, an anti-abortion crisis pregnancy center having shared someone's ultrasound data with law enforcement to support the prosecution of a pregnant person. That person wasn't considering abortion. That's not why they were at the CPC, but they had their ultrasound information there and shared it with law enforcement. So, I think men have to see these bigger patterns and decide if this is the country that they want to live in, never mind the issue of actually, protecting your own family and friends and people in your life. So no need to wait for an engraved invitation. We want you here. And we appreciate all of our male allies very much. And again, people who identify as all kinds of genders need to be in the fight because we're all affected.
Yeah. I'm really glad you bring up this whole irony in some of the resistance against abortion and reproductive autonomy, because a lot of people might not really even see how these people, as you were saying, really just kind of give away some of the stuff that they love arguing for. And it's not coherent.
Right, right. It's not particularly, there's a theatrical masculinity performed, I witness sometimes. And I can't imagine where offering your family up to the government to deny medical care is it's part of that. Makes no sense.
Yeah. So you work at the Women's Law Project, which is a Pennsylvania organization that specializes in litigation. So what are some of the biggest wins and losses that you have had within the field of reproductive autonomy?
Ooh, okay. Well, so we're a state-based public interest legal center focused on gender justice issues. We do litigate. We also do policy advocacy, community education, and provide direct legal counsel because our whole program, our litigation and policy advocacy, is informed by the courage of our clients. So we represent, for example, people who experience pregnancy discrimination in the workplace, and then we can use their, leverage what we learn from them to improve, systems reform, to engage in systems reform and improve the system overall so that hopefully there are fewer people that suffer under the system and come to us for individual help by making, systemic change. So litigation is certainly part of that strategy. We're celebrating our 50th year, by the way, right now.
Wow.
So super exciting. And we are actually, this year, we celebrated a huge win. The case is called Allegheny Reproductive Health Center, the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services. It's a lawsuit filed in 2019. The plaintiffs that we're representing with some co-counsel are freestanding abortion providers in Pennsylvania. A unique aspect of our practice is that we do represent Pennsylvania abortion providers, both in impact litigation, like what I'm about to describe, as well as day-to-day compliance issues. When you have 1,237 pages of statutes and regulations incoherently governing the provision of abortion care, there's lots of questions and issues that arise unexpectedly and need clarification. So anyway, getting back to the big lawsuit, so we filed it in 2019 we're challenging Pennsylvania's statutory ban on Medicaid coverage of abortion care. Medicaid is a federal/state program. And so you might have heard of the Hyde Amendment that bans federal funds from covering abortion through Medicaid programs, but states could cover abortion care via the state part of that funding. And many states do. It's about 17 or 18 states do right now. So we have challenged the Medicaid ban in Pennsylvania. And in January, 5 years into litigation, which is still ongoing, but the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania did something that has transformed the legal landscape in Pennsylvania. So to not get too in the weeds, basically, Pennsylvania was the first state to implement a state ERA. Everybody's heard of the federal ERA, right? Still trying to get it passed, still not passed. However, state constitutions can also have ERAs, and Pennsylvania passed one in 1971. There was a flurry of litigation following that. Not only litigation, challenging laws perceived to be discriminatory, sex or gender discrimination, but also even legislatively, the Pennsylvania Commission for Women was established to look at our laws and identify laws that would not hold up under an ERA, under a simple constitutional amendment that forbids sex and gender discrimination. So that commission came up with more than 20, something like 27 legislative proposals, right? So it was a sweeping sweeping change. However, in 1985, there was litigation. It was called the Fisher precedent, the Fisher case. So just referring to it as Fisher. And unfortunately, what the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania's ruling in 1985 did was inappropriately restrict the ERA from applying to scenarios where there were sex-linked physical characteristics involved. Meaning, without getting too technical, essentially restricting the ERA from applying to the vast majority of scenarios where there is sex and gender discrimination. Because how is sex and gender discrimination so often justified? Through, pointing to our ability to get pregnant, right? Can't run a marathon because they used to say your uterus might fall out if a woman ran 26 miles, all kinds of things. So all that to say, Pennsylvanians have been deprived the full breadth of our constitutional protections against sex and gender discrimination since 1985. And so we knew, in order to successfully eliminate the Medicaid ban on abortion coverage, which is the biggest barrier to abortion care in Pennsylvania, this precedent needed to be overturned. And so that was a success in January. So now Allegheny Repro is the shorthand precedent for the precedent that replaced the Fisher precedent. So that's a huge win. The case itself, in terms of eliminating the Medicaid ban, has now been remanded back down to Commonwealth Court, and we're proceeding there under the new legal standard, of which the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania declared the Medicaid ban, quote, presumptively unconstitutional. So, but we feel good about that, how that's going. What's another win? That's the big litigation win. We have a couple other big wins in Pennsylvania, in this climate. We're celebrating all wins. Another one was that at the end of 2023, the Shapiro administration did not renew a contract with the anti-abortion crisis pregnancy center industry. So Pennsylvania was also the first state to divert public funding to anti-abortion executives and activists. So after many decades and many millions of dollars later, we are out of the grim business of financing anti-abortion activists and reallocated that money into, I know this is radical, but an evidence-based program to support pregnant people as opposed to anti-abortion counseling and so on. And actually, I just want to say it's full circle. I'd mentioned that we're celebrating 50 years, and our organization was founded in part because of the Pennsylvania ERA by lawyers who wanted to seek to leverage it. So I think that's just so cool, because beyond, our organization, it just shows how the chain of generations were building on each other's wins. If a representative named Gerald Kaufman hadn't introduced the Pennsylvania ERA in 1969, and if all of those people didn't pass it into law in 71, and if the feminist activists who did the grassroots flyering and leafleting in 71 didn't get everyone to understand what it was and vote yes at the ballot box, then we wouldn't be founded, we wouldn't be doing this litigation, so it's very cool to me to think about really how many hands are a part of, each success that we do win. Quality takes everybody.
Yeah, that really is amazing. And first of all, congratulations on all your wins. It's great to hear about that. And I'm also
Thank you.
sorry for, I guess, misspeaking about you earlier. I thought just litigation, but no, you have all this policy and education and public outreach. That's really great.
Thanks. Yeah.
So while litigation is always important, not everyone can get involved in that specific cause. So what are some other ways that people can join the fight for reproductive freedoms?
I'm glad you asked. Well, certainly voting in every election, where there's a reason we are a proudly state-based public interest legal center. There's been a lot of talk since Dobbs about the state rights, is it in the state and the federal? The fight has always been in the states. Sometimes I see anti-abortion rhetoric that frames the Dobbs decision as having empowered the states to, make our own rules. I just need to point out how, no, we were, to be clear, we were stripped of our fundamental rights. Dobbs eliminated the baseline. Our constitutional right is a baseline, and then states can and should be building upon those protections. So the floor fell out, right? There was no transfer of power that way. So anyway, all that to say, state elections are very important. Many states, in Pennsylvania, we vote for our judges. Hugely important to do your homework and vote for the judiciary that you want to see interpreting laws and interpreting, things like the state ERA. And be in touch with your state legislature. Believe me when I tell you, people who are on the opposite side of this are in touch with state lawmakers all of the time. I've been working with state lawmakers for a long time. And, I think that even thanking them when they do the right thing, sometimes I'll see people say, I'm not thanking them for doing their jobs, and that's misunderstanding the thank you. Again, kitchen table versus policy advocacy. You're not sending them a thank you note the way you do in response to like a birthday gift. You're letting them know that you're a constituent that watched what they did and that support the decision they made, and state lawmakers need to know they should be wanting to represent their constituents. And how are they to know what their constituents are thinking if you don't tell them? So get used to it, get in touch with them. They want to be in touch with you, and then finally, educating each other what you're doing is just so amazing. We all need to be we're amid wild disinformation, fractured media, conspiracy theories. There's a lot going on out there, right? Like, so even, we know that people get information and trust information from trusted individuals in their life, so help a person out that is just experiencing this onslaught of, propaganda information, especially as an election's coming. I mean, a politician's job, a candidate's job is to get elected. Look at their voting record and their policies, not listening to their commercial. Okay. So, doing everything you can in that way to educate each other, and also understanding that in a big election, like a presidential election, it's way beyond, I see people get really into, that's my cat needing attention, sorry. People get really into sort of the cult of personality around the candidates. And, it's understandable to a degree, but we're talking about you're not voting for a person, you're voting for a platform, you're voting for a policy agenda. So make sure that you educate yourself, beyond what you may, you're kind of that whole like, I want to vote for someone who I'd have a beer with or whatever. I don't even understand that, like, as a policy nerd, but so that's the long way of saying to do what you're doing and make sure that you educate each other when you can.
Yeah. And it's really great that you bring up political advocacy and education and all these things, especially with such a pivotal election coming up. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for being so interested in all the topics that you're interested in, including this one.
Well, that is all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me, Miss Murtha. I have really wanted to know about or hear about this from someone for a long time. It's really great to hear you talk.
Awesome, Ryan. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Miss Murtha. It's good to see you. That's it for the 39th episode of A Change is a Chance. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next episode.